We have with us today Peter Schilla, who is going to be speaking about Diana V's Board State of Education. How is it that you came to work for California Rural Legal Assistance?
Well, early in law school, I had already decided that I wanted to use my legal skills on behalf of our less privileged citizens. And uh, so I tried uh, an internship during my summer between second and third year in law school at the Legal Aid Society in San Mateo County, and I found that that was the direction that I definitely wanted to follow. So then I joined up right after law school with a program called VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, and worked out an arrangement with CRLA in the Gilroy office, and that's how I started with them.
Can you tell us about Diana V State Board of Education?
This case uh, originated in the Salinas Valley. It was filed in 1970, and our lead uh, counsel was Maurice Jourdain. And it involved classes for the mentally retarded, as they were called in those days. And these classes were uh, structured so that they were essentially a dead end track. It was not a transitional program. It was very different curriculum with much less of an objective in terms of what the children would be able to do when they completed their studies. The placement system for these classes was all in English, and it was very heavily reliant on IQ tests. And the case uh, addressed the overplacement of Latino children because we noticed that statewide and in many districts, there was a much larger percentage of children who were Hispanic than there were in the district as a whole. And there was a long negotiation with the department and the State Board of Education, which resulted in a consent decree that was approved by the federal court in 1973. And it basically required the districts to file information with the state about the makeup of these classes, and where there was a much larger percentage of children of Hispanic background than the average of the school district, there was an investigation, and in many cases, there was retesting of children required. And if somebody tested out of the class, then the district had to also provide a plan on how these children would be transitioned back into the regular schools.
And Peter, I'm going to ask an kind of a follow-up question to that. So eventually it was codified in California Ed Code that the language assessments for the purposes of special education identification needed to occur in their primary language. What was the process? How long did that take for it to, come into effect?
Well, the the complaint originally was founded on that problem, and the State Board of Education had designated about a dozen acceptable IQ tests, but every one of them was in English,
Hmm.
and not one of them had been validated for Hispanic or Black pupils. So the one of the commitments that the Department of Education made was that they would uh, develop uh, or examine uh, approaches which were not so dependent on the English uh, language, and so they included things like adaptive behavior evaluations, which could be conducted in the primary language.
What should an advocate do if they see a potential violation of civil rights? And when should one consider legal action?
Well, as a general guideline, the most important thing right at the beginning is to document the situation, document especially the way in which the students are harmed. And uh, it is also important to follow through with the normal complaint procedures to see whether there is a response which will help cure the situation. The it also is valuable to consult with the Civil Rights Office of the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, and they're located in San Francisco. In terms of when to consider litigation, that depends a great deal on resources because uh, it's it's not easy to find legal resources these days, and the cost is immense. So it probably should not be considered unless it's absolutely the last option.
Who were your greatest allies and what made them great?
In in the Diana case in particular, the of course the first I would have to name would be our lead counsel, Mr. Jourdain, and the regular members of our CRLA staff who worked on the case. But beyond that, there was extremely great value in the expert witnesses that we were able to reach out to and help us formulate not only the relief in the case, but also they were of great value in all the legislative uh, actions that were taken over a considerable time period afterwards. And there were reforms at both the state and the federal level.
Over the 50 years that you've worked as an attorney advocating for legal services, you had wins and losses and many long days in between. What kept you going?
Well, I would have to say that, especially in the field of education work, because that was a focus of mine over many years, but not all the time. I was working for many years on health advocacy as well. The people that I worked with most closely many of whom are part of our ELLLI family now, are the ones that kept me going. And uh, that is still true today. And that is a part of our ELLI's advocacy framework, which we need to foster as much as possible. And network is also one of the ways to keep our heads above water, even though it may be tough out there.
What message do you have for the next generation of English learner advocates?
Well, I would say mostly uh, it's it's very obvious that uh, it's not going to be a win every day, and that it's going to be a long struggle. And I I would just echo the many people who say that we need resilience and we need to continue our dedication, and everything is one step at a time, and sometimes it's a backward one.
If you could wave a magic wand and change anything in the system or in the world today, what would it be?
Well, I would have to say that I would love to gift all of our teachers with the skills and the ability to address the special needs of English learners and other children with special challenges, and uh, the desire to really bring out the best in our kids. That would be addressing what I feel over all these many years is the single most difficult mountain to climb. Just amazing that we are going after these issues in the format of these kinds of convenings, and I think we must follow and continue them as much as possible.
Do you remember the day when you were sitting at at the table with Norm and others and came up with the idea of the English Learner Leadership and Legacy Initiative?
Well, it had a lot to do with Guillermo Lopez.
Tell us about.
And Guillermo was the director of the English Learner Division in the State Department of Education for many years, and his passing provoked Norm and me to have some really strong thoughts about how we should attempt to not only honor his legacy, but make sure that the the leadership possibilities are expanded so that we can address the needs of our English learner children.
It's it's an incredible map, and we're hoping the legacy will continue far in the future. So thank you so much.